And is a simple word with great power over meaning. It's a word often overlooked and perhaps thought of as overused, but as demonstrated in the novel The Knife of Never Letting Go, it has the potential to establish a character's voice in a way no adjective could replicate. It is a technique in itself, and one man who knows all about the power it holds is the book's author, Patrick Ness. Ness's first novel, The Knife of Never Letting Go, uses the word and to great effect throughout, subtly inflicting changes of pace and emotion upon the reader. The book was published back in 2008, meaning it celebrates its 10th anniversary this year, and it is the first of three in the Chaos Walking series. It has won several prizes for literature and received praise from dozens of literary critics. This novel champions a technique which might be referred to as the use of and. This seemingly insignificant word makes all the difference in the structure of the paragraphs, the pace of the story, and the overall feeling created for the reader. The run-on sentences, which use and in place of a full stop or comma, establish an impression of the narrator's anxious personality and the rush of thoughts flooding through his mind. The voice of the main character is so distinct that it conveys a detailed description of what is happening and how that makes him feel, in a way which expresses those emotions. The result is compelling paragraphs which often unveil plenty of detail and emotion in a single run-on sentence. These sentences alternate with shorter sentences which often begin with and. These shorter sentences slow the pace and create tension in place of the usual flow. This allows certain parts of the text to stand out, indicating their importance in the development of the main character's profile and of his relationship with the reader throughout the story. Whilst the novel features many examples of this technique throughout, it is most effective during moments of heightened tension. The run-on effect of and in sentences and paragraphs gives the reader an important insight into the mind of the main character, Todd Hewitt. His rambling narration style might seem unusual, but the author uses this very deliberately in order to highlight aspects of Todd's personality, in that he is a fairly basic character, experiencing thoughts and feelings simple enough to integrate with his constant stream of narrative. This style also reflects the inherently jumbled nature of human thoughts, referred to in the novel as noise. On a larger scale, this style of writing and the sense of foreboding it brings foreshadow the eventual revelation of this town's terrible predicament, an odd germ which has killed all of the women and left the men with the ability to hear each other's thoughts. It does this by fueling Todd's narration with a subtle nervous energy, whilst also giving small hints away through his interactions with other characters. Here is one of many examples of the strategic use of and in the novel. I stop for a second when I hear a bunch of smaller bangs from the direction of the house, which got to be rifle shots, and I think of the rifle that Cillian took from Mr. Prentice Jr. and all the rifles that Mayor Prentice and his men have locked away in the town, and how all those guns against Cillian's stolen rifle and the few others we got in the house ain't going to be much of a fight for very long, and it gets me to wondering what the bigger bangs were, and I realise they were probably Cillian blowing up the generators to confuse the men and make everyone's noise so loud they can't even hear the whisper of mine way out here. In this example, the narrator is describing only a few seconds in time, but the level of detail and the pace created by the repetition of and implies greater importance and dramatic value for the reader. This works because the author has built up to the dramatic scene through smaller uses of the technique in the pages preceding it. What's more, it divulges the narrator's thought process as well as the action he observes. Through subtle inclusions like I think of, it gets me to wondering, and I realise, allowing the reader to feel more entwined with the story and the character himself. The full disclosure created by this style makes for an intimate read. This excerpt is a perfect demonstration of the author's unique style, which continues throughout the novel, used often in moments of heightened tension. The style has the added impact of both increasing the pace by hurrying the sentences along, and decreasing it by expanding a few moments of action into a lengthy paragraph. Throughout the novel, the word and is also repeatedly used as the first word of a sentence. This is effective in breaking up the run-on flow of paragraphs, like the first example, and inciting a different kind of tension. In this way, the story stays fresh and interesting from the very base level. Whilst the author employs strong repetition of words and style, interspersing alternating sentence structures throughout draws the reader's attention in a subtle way. The author expresses Todd's thoughts and feelings through not only the choice of words, but the style of writing, allowing the reader to get further inside his mind. Here's an example of and used as the first word of the sentence. And my noise buzzes red, and I clench the knife to strike at him. and I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. And, and, and. Here the narrator takes his time to describe one action at once, across small time increments, and yet still, thanks to the contrast of the short, sharp sentences, it reads at pace. The repeated use of and is designed to escalate tension, whilst also emphasizing Todd's fairly basic thought process. In doing so, it emphasizes the intensity of his emotion. This example also goes beyond using and to lead into sentences, by exaggerating its use through repetition. The author's use of 3 ands in a row here is more complex than it seems at first, as doing so simultaneously builds tension and stalls time. It acts as a build-up and as a pause, which has the effect of catching the reader in a suspended moment. On a more basic level, the tension created by the use of and in present tense here makes for a compelling, action-focused read. As we've seen, the use of and has a very specific dramatic impact in this novel, and one of the big reasons for this is its focus on events rather than feelings. Using the action of the scene and that which can be easily visualized by the reader to allow for inference of emotions keeps the plot moving quickly and avoids any sense of diary entry writing, despite the entire novel being based inside the narrating character's mind. Ultimately, the use of and run-on sentences enables the author to draw the reader into the action in real time, since they experience everything at the same moment as the narrating character. In this example, the narrator uses and to exaggerate the speed with which this particular scene escalates. It crunches as it goes in, turning to the side as it hits a bone, and the spackle screams the most terrible, terrible sound, and dark red blood sprays out of the wound, and he brings a long arm up and scratches across my face, and I pull back my arm and I stab him again, and a long screeching breath comes out of his mouth with a loud gurgle, and his arms and legs still scramble around him, and he looks at me with his black, black eyes, and his noise is filled with pain and bafflement and fear. Again, this style of example both slows and speeds up the action in the text by zeroing in on one particular moment, and then following up with a flurry of small actions happening one after the other. With its hurried flow and action focus, this sentence subtly sets the reader up to infer what Todd is feeling as the full effect of his actions and their consequences weighs in. Now, this technique might seem simple enough to employ, or even similar to poorly executed sentence structure, since most of us are taught in the early years at school not to string long sentences together with and. However, Ness's usage of this technique is far more complex and calculated than that. It stems from a psychological understanding of the human brain, running on an endless stream of consciousness, and uses this idea to let the reader inside Todd's mind. Also taking into account the tension of events unfolding around Todd as the main character, and his likely reaction to those events, the author expresses it all through the nature of Todd's speech. The technique is particularly effective when quickly divulging lots of extra detail in the right places, and then omitting it entirely in others, thus drawing and diverging the reader's attention. But it loses its shine if used too often or without cause. These techniques have had a significant influence in my own work. I've always been intrigued by the notion of creating meaning simply through the syntax and flow established in a piece of writing. This effect is achievable just by using and in the right places, and often best used, as in Ness's work, during moments of tension or heightened emotion. This is an excerpt from a piece I have written entitled Dig Deep. My work employs a similar use of and to that in Ness's novel, and uses it for a similar purpose. The technique has several effects and purposes here: to emit large amounts of information in a short space of time, to draw the reader into the action, and in this case, to create an uneasy feeling for the reader. The use of and causes this sentence to rush over important details, such as the shovel and the house, whilst also giving an impression of nervousness and panic. This effect is exaggerated by seemingly surplus description, for example, a plastic bag which is just a little bit too small, which subtly implies untold information for the reader. As in Ness's novel, this technique is designed to make the reader curious and eager to piece the story together. Repetition of the first sentence at the end of the paragraph also exaggerates this effect, giving an insight into the thoughts and feelings of the narrator. Here's another excerpt of the same piece as it begins to build towards the climax. As in Ness's work, this section intersperses the use of and run-on sentences with a dramatic break. The use of and as the first word of unfinished sentences like these leaves the reader in suspense, wondering what will become of the situation. This is in direct contrast with the next paragraph, which returns to the run-on and structure and picks up pace once again. So what can we take away from all of this? Ultimately, it's about doing away with the rules in order to create a piece which resonates emotionally, using language in a way that means something rather than for the purpose of grammatical correctness. As writers, you have to give yourself permission to use words in whichever way you see fit, for your purpose and for the characters you create. And sometimes that might mean ignoring some of the boundaries of which you have been warned. However, try to avoid using this technique and others like it simply to maintain consistency in your writing. Consistency kills novelty, and without novelty, this technique will have less effect in your writing. Ultimately, establishing strong voices for your characters and finding ways to make those voices more real through adaptation to situations is the key to giving your readers a real experience. Creating strong characters and representing them truthfully should be your first priority. Let's finish off with a few tips for executing this technique in your own work. Firstly, know your character. Imagine your character was alive. Are they likely to inhabit this style of speech or thought? Understand that the authenticity of that voice from your reader's perspective stems from the authenticity of your writing. Also, getting inside the mind of your character is critically important when writing in this style, as the writing here stems from thoughts inside the character's mind. Secondly, choose your moment. This technique is most powerful used in moments of heightened tension or emotion. If you use it at the wrong points in your story, you risk coming across as simply uneducated or misguided in your writing style. Remember, it should not resemble a shopping list. Finally, avoid overuse. The key to making this technique stand out is to intersperse traditional sentence and paragraph structures around it, so that it maintains the novelty with a strong impact. The best thing you can do as writers to improve your technique and general ability is to read, dissect, and analyze the work of others, because in doing so, you learn to notice and appreciate all the little things which make up a great story. And that's kind of like magic. I look forward to seeing you on the shelves.